minus 89 degrees Celsius. That is not a typo, and that is not the coldest it gets. From a satellite photo, the top and bottom of our planet look like twins. Two identical white deserts stretching to the horizon, endless ice, endless silence. That image is a lie. What you're actually looking at are two completely different worlds, operating under two completely different sets of physical rules, home to creatures that will never meet each other in the entire history of life on Earth, and locked in a slow-motion countdown that could redraw the map of every coastline on the planet. The Arctic in the north is an ocean, frozen solid, trapped between continents like ice cubes in a glass. Antarctica in the south is a continent, an actual landmass, buried under an ice shield taller than entire mountain ranges. One side of our planet is melting at a terrifying speed. The other has spent millions of years quietly building up something far more dangerous. So what invisible force split our planet into these two opposing realities? And why is one pole sprinting toward disaster while the other waits, frozen and patient, for its turn? Let's find out. Picture setting out on an expedition to the edge of the world, expecting the same scenery at both ends. White, frozen, endless. That visual trick has fooled people for centuries, planting the false belief that the poles are simply mirror images of each other. But ask yourself this: why can people and animals walk safely across one pole for thousands of years, while a single unprepared step on the other can kill you within hours? That surface-level resemblance hides the single biggest geographic contradiction on Earth. Underneath the Arctic snow, there's no solid ground at all, just an enormous frozen ocean ringed on every side by the edges of continents like ice sitting inside a giant cup. The South Pole is the exact opposite, a colossal isolated landmass, a true continent surrounded by a ring of the coldest, most violent water on the planet. The interaction between these two systems controls regional climate, ice density, and even the direction of global wind patterns. When the first wooden sailing ships pushed south toward the edges of the map, their crews expected to find something familiar: green tundra, wandering herds, maybe even people, the way explorers had found in the north. Instead, they were met by sheer, impassable walls of ice cliffs rising straight into a gray, hostile sky, an eerie silence, a total absence of life and cold that felt physically impossible. Old explorers spun terrifying myths about what lay beyond those walls: hollow earth passages, hidden civilizations. Modern science has long since proven all of that nonsense, but the real explanation turned out to be just as strange. Buried deep beneath that white surface, where the sheer thickness of the ice is enough to bend the actual laws of physics as we experience them. There's a documented case of a heavy research tractor abandoned by scientists decades ago that was slowly swallowed by the ice sheet, sinking dozens of meters and drifting toward the ocean along with the glacier's flow, not because the ground was unstable, but because the crust itself was bending under the weight of an enormous dome of ice. In 1911, the legendary Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen became the first person in history to reach the South Pole, and instead of the flat plain his team expected, they found an endless, hostile plateau sitting 3,000 meters above sea level. And that's the real heart of the contradiction between the two poles. In the Arctic, the ice is only 3 or 4 meters thick, with a roaring ocean churning directly beneath it. In the south, the armor of ice plunges past 4,000 meters deep, completely burying ancient mountain ranges and canyons from human eyes. That extreme altitude creates a zone where the ordinary rules of nature give way to something closer to alpine extremes: thin air, brutal difficulty with every step, and a merciless rule that governs everything. Every 100 meters of elevation steals more heat, turning the top of that ice dome into the planet's primary freezer. While the Arctic is gently warmed from below by a hidden ocean acting like a planetary heater, Antarctica's rocky foundation is completely cut off from that liquid lifeline, trapped at an altitude where the frozen ground has never once felt outside warmth. Steel becomes brittle in that cold. Standard diesel fuel turns into thick gel. Alternative history enthusiasts have spun wild theories for decades about frozen cities or secret passages buried under that crushing pressure. Serious scientists debunked all of it long ago, but the real mystery is even stranger, because under that monstrous pressure, the ice itself starts behaving like a viscous liquid. Under 4 kilometers of compression, the lowest layers melt right against the bedrock, which is exactly why heavy equipment slowly sinks into what looks like a solid monolith drifting toward the coast along with the glacier. That same crushing pressure combined with geothermal heat rising from deep within the earth keeps the base of the ice sheet in a constant state of melting, carving out hidden lakes and fast subglacial rivers, an invisible internal mechanism that builds enormous tension capable of lying dormant for centuries before waking up and redrawing the planet's entire climate map in an instant. At those extreme altitudes, the human mind itself starts to fail, with no trees, no rocks, nothing to anchor your sense of direction. And that's when extreme cold from the highlands collides with coastal air to create an invisible enemy. Why does heat from the rest of the planet reach the northern coasts so easily, but never manage to break through to the southern pole? In 1912, the survivors of Robert Scott's British expedition confronted that exact mystery, trapped in a tent, just 11 miles from the supply depot that could have saved their lives. What killed them wasn't only the cold, it was an impassable barrier sailors call the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, a colossal ring of ocean water spinning endlessly around the continent, sealing it off from any warm air drifting down from the equator. Because of the current, the southern giant exists in near total thermal isolation, an impenetrable fortress of ice that the planet's warmth simply cannot reach. And if you think that outer water barrier is the worst of it, the real terror lives in the katabatic winds born in the heart of the continent itself. Heavy, supercooled air sliding down the immense ice dome toward the coast at terrifying speed, generating monstrous windstorms. Polar station records include a case where a sudden gust instantly flipped and dragged a heavy parked research aircraft across the ice. These violent currents shatter sturdy metal equipment, bury buildings in snow, and flip vehicles with ease, turning the continent's surface into one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Science fiction circles still love to claim these storms have some artificial origin. Scientists explained it long ago. It's simply altitude and temperature doing what altitude and temperature do. The Arctic tells a completely different story because unlike the sealed-off South, the northern pole is wide open, fully exposed to powerful warm ocean currents. The most important being the famous Gulf Stream. Warm tropical water flows unobstructed into the northern basin, cracking the ice apart and dragging in a colossal amount of energy that quite literally corrodes the polar ice cap from the inside out. That vulnerability to the open ocean creates entirely unique conditions for life in the north. While the south barricades itself behind walls of wind and freezes everything in reach, the north actively drinks in the gifts of warm seas. Two opposing climate systems have permanently split this planet into a zone of eternal cold and a zone of fragile, struggling polar warmth. And that exact divide is what sent life on opposite ends of the Earth down two completely separate evolutionary paths, producing astonishing creatures perfectly adapted to brutal polar conditions who, because of an invisible thermal wall, will never once cross paths in the entire history of the world. Ever wonder why kids' cartoons always show polar bears standing next to penguins? In reality, thousands of kilometers separate them, and that popular image is a complete myth because nature distributed life across the two poles with very deliberate logic. The true rulers of the North are massive white predators and the indigenous peoples who built entire lives around Arctic conditions. And the secret to their survival is proximity, because the northern pole is ringed by solid continents. Forest animals migrate in easily, and the coastal edges bloom with tundra full of berries, moss, and shrubs. In summer, the place comes alive, herds of reindeer running across the landscape, generations of people fishing and hunting off the generous resources of neighboring land. The South Pole plays by far crueler rules. In 1930, the famous American polar explorer Richard Byrd documented something startling during his expedition. For hundreds of kilometers into the frozen interior, there isn't a single trace of land mammals. Their place was taken instead by an extraordinary group of flightless birds, penguins, a species that managed to thrive along Antarctica's coasts, purely because the most isolated continent on Earth has no land predators at all. With nothing to hide from on shore, penguins eventually lost the need to fly, trading wings for flippers built for hunting in fish-rich waters. Between north and south sits an invisible thermal border at the equator that neither polar bears nor penguins can physically cross. If a polar bear somehow reached the south, it would devastate those defenseless bird colonies in an instant, but that brutal isolation is exactly what's kept this fragile world alive. Online conspiracy circles still spread myths about giant mutant monsters or ancient dinosaurs frozen in Antarctica's interior. And of course, that's pure fiction, because nothing of significant size could survive deep inside that ice shield without food or warmth. But real hidden life does exist there. You just have to look beneath the water and the ice itself. The underwater ecosystems at opposite ends of the planet differ radically because of temperature and current differences. In the north, giant whales and schools of cod swim beneath the ice fields, while in the south, the seafloor belongs to colossal colonies of tiny crustaceans called krill and unique transparent fish whose veins carry actual natural antifreeze instead of ordinary blood. That deep biological split turned the two poles into two completely independent evolutionary laboratories. Northern animals learned to migrate constantly between frozen ocean and blooming tundra to escape winter starvation. Southern creatures stayed permanently tethered to the narrow edge of a violent sea, beyond which stretches nothing but frozen desert. And while biologists marvel at these resilient creatures, geologists are anxiously waiting on a different kind of discovery, because Antarctica's biggest secret isn't on the surface at all. It's buried in total darkness below. Imagine falling into a trap that has been completely sealed off from sunlight for millions of years. That's essentially what researchers stumbled onto when they began hunting for hidden lakes beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. In 1996, an international team of researchers officially confirmed the existence of Lake Vostok, a massive body of water hidden beneath 4 kilometers of compacted ice. What's astonishing is that the water stays liquid, kept that way by the crushing pressure from above and a faint, barely perceptible trickle of heat, rising from deep within the planet. Drilling teams have already pulled up traces of unique bacteria that somehow adapted to live in total darkness with zero oxygen. But how can eternal surface cold and a literal underground flame coexist on the coldest continent on Earth? It sounds impossible, but beneath that white blanket, Antarctica is volcanically active. Dozens of heat sources and even active volcanoes sit buried under kilometers of ice, warming the ice sheet from underneath. That bizarre combination of cosmic surface cold and incandescent magma below creates zones of extreme internal tension. Ice melts intensely right against the bedrock, carving out enormous underground cavities. And through those hidden channels, massive blocks of ice slide steadily toward the ocean. Conspiracy circles still cling to legends about secret wartime bunkers or hidden laboratories buried in those warm subglacial caverns. All invented, all debunked. But the genuinely unsettling part is real. People lose all sense of orientation down there. In that infinite white void, researchers repeatedly report navigation simply breaking down. A standard magnetic compass becomes useless, its needle pulled straight down by vertical magnetic field lines instead of pointing north, leaving it spinning uselessly with no horizontal reference at all. The complete absence of any landmark, no trees, no rocks, quickly triggers unsettling auditory and visual hallucinations in isolated researchers. That eerie collision between magnetic chaos and hidden underground heat makes the southern continent one of the most unpredictable places on the map. While scientists in the north calmly study an open seafloor from research ships, scientists in the south have to physically tunnel through kilometers of ancient ice just to begin unraveling the planet's secrets. Those hidden lakes and enormous voids prove just how little we actually understand about what's happening inside this frozen giant. And right now, those incomprehensible deep processes are slowly surfacing, creating a global imbalance that's already starting to reshape everyday life. Ever notice how news coverage is constantly warning us about melting polar ice, while the two poles seem to behave in completely opposite ways? That contradiction sits at the heart of the entire mystery. At the northernmost edge of the planet, Arctic ice is vanishing fast, exposing dark patches of open ocean and carving new shipping routes that didn't exist before. In 2012, scientists recorded the lowest Arctic sea ice extent ever measured, confirming exactly how fast that process is moving. Antarctica, on the other hand, has played a far cleverer game, appearing for years to researchers as almost perfectly stable and unmoving. Thanks to its massive altitude and powerful wind barrier, the continent's interior keeps holding extremely low temperatures, lulling us into a false sense of security. But behind that deceptive calm hides a genuinely terrifying mechanism that scientists have uncovered along the continent's edges. Enormous slab, S of ice, jutting directly into the ocean act like giant natural dams. These coastal ice shelves are literally holding back the colossal mass of interior ice that rests on bedrock and is constantly creeping downward under its own weight. If warm ocean water erodes and breaks through those outer barriers, a massive avalanche of ice from the central dome would surge unobstructed into the sea, triggering an irreversible chain reaction that humanity simply would not have the power to stop. In 2020, an iceberg the size of a small country broke away from Antarctica, the first serious warning shot for climate scientists. Online alarmist theories love to claim the poles could melt instantly and trigger an overnight global flood, swallowing entire continents up to the mountaintops. And of course, that's pure exaggeration. Polar ice physically cannot vanish in a single day. But the real future of our planet's balance is still serious enough to keep scientists genuinely worried about the world map as we know it. If the fragile balance between a thawing northern ocean and an awakening southern giant is ever truly broken, global sea levels could rise by several meters, reshaping coastlines, threatening infrastructure in the world's biggest coastal cities, and forcing a complete restructuring of global logistics. That shift would redefine life as we know it across the entire planet, altering ocean currents and climate patterns in nearly every corner of the world. Two opposing polar worlds, which have quietly kept our planet in balance for so long, are now drifting toward an unpredictable future, And while the Arctic slowly transforms into a navigable ocean, Antarctica keeps silently accumulating a colossal hidden force, one capable, at any moment, of reminding humanity exactly who really owns this planet. The white desert in the south doesn't want to sleep anymore, and its awakening could become the single most defining event in the history of our civilization.